Hi and welcome to this lesson, and now we are going to learn about nodes. Most video editing applications use layers for color effects, but Davinci Resolve is unique in that respect because it uses something called nodes instead of layers. Many people find the concept of nodes very confusing, but I personally think it's a very simple concept. You may call it filters in a box, because each node is like a box which receives the video from the left side, applies some color effects on it, and outputs it from the right side. So here I am in the Davinci Resolve color workspace, and we are going to focus on nodes. So let me try to minimize everything else that we don't need. And I'll further reduce the size of the preview to just focus on nodes. So let me try to explain the basic workflow of nodes in Davinci Resolve. So basically it all flows from the left side all the way to the right side. On the left edge, we have the original video as the input shown by this green dot. Then color effects are applied on it through a single or multiple nodes. And on the right side, we get the final output, which is to be rendered and is shown with this green dot. Along the way, video passes through each node and effects are applied on it in steps. So we can select a node, apply color effects using these tools at the bottom, and those effects will be saved inside that node. Now, if we had another node here and we selected that and applied some more color adjustments, those adjustments will be saved in the new node. Now let's play around with the nodes a little bit. So this is the node that comes by default. If I select it and I go to the color wheels, I can make a few adjustments and see what happens. So right now the colors are pretty weird in this picture. So I can turn on my waveform to see what's going on, and I can increase the gain. I can reduce the offset, tweak gamma a little bit. And right away you see the image looks much better. So right now we have only one node, and that is also selected. So whatever changes I made here, all of them are being saved in that node. And the cool thing is that not only this frame is optimized, but I can scrub through and you can see the whole video has been optimized. If I want to see how much difference this node is making to the original video, I can toggle it on and off using keyboard shortcut Command D for Mac operating system and Control D for Windows, which is also supplied in the list of keyboard shortcuts in the beginning. So using Command D or Control D, you can turn it on and off and see what's the difference. And further, you can just click on this number. And by clicking it again and again, you can turn it on and off. So right now, this is just one clip. If I go to the clips panel, here you see there are many other clips, but none of them have been adjusted yet. So you will see there is a number above each clip, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and only one has this circular pattern around it. So this is a visual signal that colors have been adjusted in that clip, and we still need to do that for the rest of the clips. Each of the clips comes with its own set of nodes, which by default is 1, but we can add more nodes to each clip if we need to. Right now, this panel is showing the nodes for this particular clip. And if I select a different clip, now its nodes are being shown here. And if I make any changes to this particular node, those will go to that particular clip. So for example, let me increase the gain a lot for this clip, and you will see that only that clip is being affected. I can further toggle the node on and off, and you can see the difference being made only to that particular clip. And now this icon has also appeared on top of this image because it has been adjusted too. If you want to reset all the color adjustments for a particular clip, you can just select it, right click in this area, and here there is an option for reset all grades and nodes for that particular clip. And you see it is reset and that icon is gone. Similarly, I can reset it for the first clip as well. So that's how nodes can be used to color correct and grade multiple clips in Davinci Resolve. Welcome back, and now we are going to talk about a very important type of nodes called serial nodes. So right now by default we only have a single node, and we can add a serial node to that in different ways. The first way is go to the top menu, color, nodes, and then add a serial node, and this adds a second node. I can undo that. The second way to add a serial node to this node is Option S for Mac or Alt S for Windows. And I will again undo that to look at the third method, which is to right click on the existing node, add node, and on the top here we have two options. The first one is add serial. So this adds the serial node after the current node, and this adds the serial node before that. Let's go with this first option. And now what happens is it will process the first node, then process the second node. So whatever changes, it keeps on adding those changes one by one like layers. Now let's apply some effects to these nodes. So I will select the first node, go to the color wheels, and let's move this gamma wheel towards really blue color. So I will further rename this. And by the way, you can add labels to each of these nodes just to remember what they are doing. So add the label and let's call it blue. So the first node is adding a bluish filter to the original video. Now I can select the second node and apply another effect to that, which is saturation. So right now it is 50, but I'll reduce it to 0. Now what's happening is the first node is making it blue. The second node is removing all the colors from that, and the end result is that at the output we have a totally black and white video. Different nodes are adding different effects. I could have mixed these effects into a single node, but using multiple nodes I can keep them separate so that I can control them individually and see their effect. Now I can toggle each of these nodes individually by selecting it and pressing Command D or Control D. Or I can toggle both of them together using the shortcut Option D or Alt D. Now keep in mind that the sequence of nodes is also very important. Same nodes can provide different effects if we change their sequence. For example, let's see what happens when we reverse the order of these nodes. So in order to do that, I can select each of these links and delete them. Grab these nodes and put them in the reverse order, and now I can reconnect them again and see what happens. So we have connected these nodes in the reverse order and the output is different. The first node removes all the initial colors this video had, and node 2 adds blue color to that. So in the end, the only color we have in the video is blue. I hope this short exercise gave you some insight into the working and flow of nodes from left side to right side. Thank you for watching. Hello and welcome. Now we will learn about parallel nodes and their working, as these nodes are very important for color correction and grading. So in the previous lessons, we have already seen serial nodes where effects are applied in a sequential order. So after one effect is applied in a node, that is sent to the next node for another effect, then maybe to another node for a different effect, and so on. But parallel nodes are different from that. So let me try to illustrate that with the help of an example. So here we have this video clip, and I can select this node, and now I can turn or shift its colors whether towards the red or maybe towards the green. And you can see that when I turn it green, everything turns green. Okay. Similarly, if I turn it blue, almost everything would turn bluish. If I make it red, everything would turn red. Okay. Now, let's say I want to control some of these colors independently from this node. For example, let's say I want to keep the color of this flower independent from whatever changes we are making inside this node. So for that purpose, we can use a parallel node. So in order to use a parallel node, of course, first we have to add that. So to add a parallel node to this node, I will right click on this node and go to this option, add node and add parallel. So here you can see this is how a parallel node looks like. Basically these are the two parallel nodes, and after that there is something called a parallel mixer. So the way it will work is this: the same input is sent to both of these nodes. So basically both these nodes are getting the exact same information at the same time, and these pieces of information can be processed. Different effects can be applied to the same video in two different nodes, and later on both these videos, after their effects applied on them, these can be sent to this parallel mixer, which combines them and it sends them to the output. Okay, so that is how this flowchart works. Now what happens if I select this node and select the colors of this flower and maybe turn it reddish or something? So there is a tool for that, and don't worry about what this tool does and how we are going to use it. Actually, we are going to have a big section on qualifiers, so don't worry about it, we will look at it later. But for now I'm just going to select the colors of this flower using this tool. And here you can see that inside this node I can see my selection, and of course some of these colors I don't want, so I will subtract those, and right now I have a pretty good selection of these colors inside this flower. And now let me turn these colors into a different color. So let me make this flower really red. If I come back to this node and shift these colors just like I was doing them previously, where everything was being affected, now see what happens. Let me turn them really green. Look what happens to the flower. The colors in the flower are almost totally independent of the changes everywhere else. Okay, it stays red while everything else has turned green. Similarly, I can turn everything else bluish and it is still remaining unchanged. Okay, so the reason for this effect is because we are using the parallel node. So this information, basically the color of this flower, this node is receiving from the input and processing it as red, making it red and sending it to the output. So no matter what we do in this node, the color of this flower is independent from these changes because it is being processed in this node and it is being sent from this node to the output irrespective of what happens to this node. Okay, so this is one of the main uses for parallel nodes, that we can apply effects on videos independently from each other. And parallel nodes can be used in many other ways, as we will explore in the upcoming lessons and sections. So for now, I'll just go ahead and reset everything that we did here. So that was a brief description about working off the parallel nodes, and thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson. Hello and welcome. In this lesson, we are going to learn how to combine nodes into a compound node. While working on large projects where you have large number of nodes, it is very important to stay organized and keep your node editor simple and concise. Moreover, after you have gone through different stages of color correction and grading, you may want to maybe log those nodes from any accidental changes or mistakes. So that is where compound nodes come in handy. So to illustrate the working of the compound nodes, let me do a basic color correction on this clip. So in order to do this color correction, because you can see that the colors in this clip are pretty weird right now. So if I add a serial node by right clicking, add node and add serial, or the shortcut for that is Alt S or Option S on a Mac. So here is this first serial node, and let me increase the highlight or gain in that. Let me add one more node, serial node, and let me adjust the shadows in that. And let's say one more node to adjust the mid-range, the midtones. So this was a pretty rough color correction, and don't worry about what I just did. I'm going to explain the process of color correction in detail pretty soon. But for now, this is just for the illustration of compound nodes. So we have done a rough color correction on this clip, and as you can see, the colors look a lot better now. So basic color correction is done. Now I want to save these whole color correction nodes as a single unit so as to stay organized and maybe lock them from unwanted changes. So what I can do is all the nodes that I want to combine, I can select them and right click, and here in the bottom there is this option create compound node, and see what happens. If I click this, all those three nodes are replaced with this single compound node, and as it says in the title, it is a compound node. And you can also tell from its border, this border is different from the border of a normal node. And I can further go ahead and rename this node just to show what it does. So if I click this node label, I can call it color correction. So that is how I can save the nodes that basically did the color correction, and I can combine them as a single unit. Now later on, let's say if you want to make any changes to that color correction and you want to make any tweaks. So for that purpose, you can right click on this compound node and pick this option, show compound node. So these are the three nodes that make up that compound node, and here I can select each of them and make any tweaks. For example, here this was for the highlights, so I can adjust the highlights further. I can make tweaks to the midtones, for example. And once I'm happy with all the changes, I can exit this view by right clicking and exit compound node. So I'm back to the view of the compound node. Moreover, just like any other node, we can also apply some color effects or visual effects on top of the compound node itself. Okay, so that will not change the nodes inside that compound node. For example, I can select this compound node. I can increase the contrast. So now this increase in contrast resides on top of this compound node, and it has nothing to do with the nodes itself. However, do keep in mind that later on, if for some reason you want to get rid of the compound node and want to go back to the original nodes inside that, the effects on the node itself will be removed when this compound node is gone. So for example, I can right click on this compound node to delete it, and if I pick this option, decompose compound node, see what happens. We are back to the original view of the three nodes that were making up the color correction, but you can see that the contrast that we added on top of that compound node is already gone. So the original color correction is unaffected, but the contrast is no more. So that's how we can use compound nodes for better organization and a better workflow. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next lesson. The next tool we have is called RGB Mixer, and with this we can change the outputs of the red, green and blue channels independently. So if you look at all of these outputs, each output has the red, green and blue colors in it, but the difference is that the red output has a higher level for red, for green output it has a higher level of green, and same for the blue output. So if I increase the levels of red, green and blue outputs, this essentially saturates the whole image. And if we want to desaturate this image, there are two options. Either we can just click this monochrome option and this will desaturate the image or convert it to black and white, or instead of doing that, we can just decrease all these color levels and that will make this black and white or make it desaturated completely. And we can further play around with these individual outputs to have different kinds of artistic effects like this one or this one. So you can get different kinds of effects by playing around with these monochrome or the individual color levels to have different kinds of effects. So that is RGB mixer. The next tool is called motion effects, and inside that there are options for noise removal like temporal noise removal, spatial noise removal, and motion blur. However, these functions are not supported by the free version of Resolve. You have to have the paid version to be able to use them. But I think in most cases, you would rarely need these functionalities unless you are doing some very specific work related to motion effects. The next tool we have is called curves, and this is also very interesting and very powerful feature. So here you have your standard curve just like in Adobe Premiere Pro, After Effects or Photoshop. So if you have done work in any of those softwares, you should be very familiar with this curve. So in this lesson, we will be applying some visual effects to this video, and for that, let me create a new node by pressing Option S, and there is a serial node. Option S for Mac operating system or Alt S for Windows. And now any visual effects I apply, those would be applied to this node because this is selected. And in this way, we can turn it on and off and see how much difference the effect is making to the clip. So as far as curves are concerned, here you have 6 dots, and each of these dots represents a different type of curve. So all of these curves do kind of the same thing, but in their own different ways. So there is a plethora of things you can do with these curves. You can adjust individual colors, you can map one color to another, make colors brighter or more saturated in very selective ways, etc. So let's play around with them. And also let me bring up this waveform so that you can see any changes happening to the waveform. So this slanted line is basically the standard curve, and we can also call it the custom curve. So its higher point shows the highlights and lower points corresponds to the shadows. And we can manipulate the clip using this curve. So I can grab this highlight point and move it down, and it basically reduces the brightness. As you can see, the clip is becoming less bright, and similarly you can see the highlights moving down. So this basically compresses the waveform. Similarly, I can grab this point and move it up. So this basically increases the brightness of shadows, and you can see that the shadows have moved up in the waveform as well, and the shadows are more bright now. And the curve is more squeezed, and similarly with the waveform. So moving these points up or down basically is having the same effect as changing the gain in the color wheels. So all the color information in this clip is carried by this line, and we can adjust individual colors in addition to playing around with the gain. So for example, this lower part represents shadows. So right now you can see there are only 2 points on this line. But by clicking anywhere on this line, I can create an additional point, and let's say I click here and one additional point is created, and now I can drag it down, and this basically pulls more information towards shadows, and you can see that the shadows have become darker in the image. Similarly, as I move it down, you can see that more information is being pulled towards shadows in the waveform. We can give it more contrast by clicking here somewhere in the upper portion of the line and pulling more information towards highlights, and you can see the changes happening in the clip as well as in the waveform, that the highlights become brighter and they become higher in this waveform. So this basically changes that straight line into a classic S curve, which represents more contrast in the actual clip. So you will see a lot of people, whenever they want to add more contrast to the image, they will just make this curve a classic S curve, and this basically spreads things apart. It basically takes the highlight and shadows and increases their gap. So highlights are brighter, shadows are darker, and this results in a more contrastier video. Now, if I want to get rid of any of these points, I can just right click on them and those points are gone. And here you can also notice that I played around with this curve, and you can see this red dot appears above the curve tool, which means that out of all these effects, the curves have been adjusted so far. So if I apply any other effects, a little red dot would also appear on those to give a visual signals that which effects have been applied to this particular clip. Also, if I just want to reset any of these curves, there's a circular arrow I can click and that reset that curve, and you can see that the red dot has been removed, just as an indication that no changes have been made to the curve or it has been reset. But so far, whatever changes we have made to this curve, those have been applied to the white curve, which is basically a combination of red, green, and blue. But the other thing we can do is we can play around with these individual red, green, and blue channels. So here you see red, green, and blue, all of them are enabled. Why? Because this link button is enabled. So whatever changes I make to this curve, those are applied to all of these channels equally. But by pressing this button and disabling it, now I can make changes to the individual red, green, and blue channels. So for example, I can select this red channel, and what I can do is I can grab this red point in the highlights and move it down, and you see the red color is desaturated, or its brightness has been decreased. So for example, I can pick this red point in the highlights and move it down, and it basically reduces red in this clip. And as you can see in the waveform, as I move it up or down, the red waveform decreases with this point moving down. And as a result, you can see that when red decreases, the blue increases, because these happen on the opposite side of the color wheel. So decreasing the red results in more blue in highlights, and you can see it turns more bluish. So right now I'm just selecting the gain of the red channel, but I can just move it back, and I can also make an S curve out of this red channel. And this basically adds a contrast in the red curve without affecting anything in the green and blue channel. So in this way, we can play around with different colors individually. But this is only when you want to adjust the individual channels, but I don't want to do that right now. So I will just right click on these points and get rid of them, or I can just reset them and link them back again. So that was the first curve, which is the custom curve. And let's move on to the next one, which is U versus U. This is how it looks like. And as the name suggests, with this curve, you can pick a U and replace it with another U. So for this example, let's change the U of this blue dress and replace it with a different U. So if I click it, you can see that by automatically these 3 points come up, which basically represents the range of these blue colors. So I can grab this point, move it up or down to change the hue of that blue color. So in this way, we can pick a color and replace it with a totally different color. And the great thing is I can decrease or increase the color range by moving these points around, and in that way I can be more specific or less specific about a particular color. So if I make this wider, it will start affecting the neighboring colors, but if I make it narrower, I can be very, very specific. But the drawback is that if I make it very, very narrow, now some portions are affected more than the other. Like you see here, this part of the dress stays green and here it turns yellowish brown or something. So I can move it back, and now I can affect all of this dress equally. So to look at the effect this curve is making to the clip, I can just toggle this node on or off by clicking on this number again and again. So this is the original clip and this is with the effect. With, without, and you can see the difference. So let me reset that, and with this tool you can do a lot of interesting things. So that was U versus U. The next one is U versus saturation. And as the name suggests, with this tool, you can pick certain colors within the image and saturate them more or less. So again, let's pick this blue color in her top for this example as well. And a color range is selected, and I can move it up to make it more saturated or move it down to make it less saturated. And you can see that the dress, which was originally blue, now it has been desaturated and it looks like gray. And I can further move this playhead, and you can see that even with the corrector moving, the color changes stay intact, which is awesome. So this is with this effect applied and this is without it. So you can see the difference. And here is another perfect example. I could pick this sky, and you can see that the color range selected is pretty close to the color range for this originally blue dress, because both of these are blue. So this is less saturated blue, but that was more saturated. So they happen to be quite close to each other. And now I can make the sky less saturated, less like her dress, or make it more saturated to make it a bit contrastier. So here this is without this node, and here this is with the node. So the dress is becoming less saturated and the sky is becoming more saturated. And of course I can make them both desaturated. So this is without and this is with this effect, and we could also choose to make them both saturated. And here this is without this effect applied and this is with the effect applied. So you can see the increased saturation in this blue in her top and in the sky. So in this way we can make things pop out a little bit more. And by the way, we can toggle this node on or off just by clicking on this number again and again, or by pressing Command D on a Mac or Control D on Windows. Let me go ahead and reset that. And the next one in the list is hue versus luminance. So this curve changes luminance or brightness of a specific color. So for example, let me pick this red color in her top. So for that, let me move it back. So when I click this red with my eyedropper, it automatically selects a range for me. So by grabbing this point and moving it up, the red color becomes brighter, and by moving it down, it becomes darker. And even if I move the playhead, you can see that the effect stays intact. This is with the effect applied and this is without it, and you can see the difference. And the great thing is that you can see it is only affecting that red color. Not a single thing in this waveform or in this clip is being affected. And that is the great thing about Davinci Resolve. It really is a very powerful software when it comes to coloring. The next one in the list is luminance versus saturation. So I can saturate or desaturate things in the image depending on their luminance or brightness. So for example, let me again pick this red color in her top. And now I can selectively saturate it, oversaturate it, or undersaturate it by moving it up for oversaturation and moving it down for undersaturation. And you can see that it is not accurately picking all the red colors, maybe because the range is too narrow. So if I widen this range, so by playing around with this range, you can make sure that all the intended colors are selected. So this is with the effect applied, this is without, and you can see how much this red is popping out now. Similarly, I can click on the sky, the color range is selected, and I can make it oversaturated or undersaturated. So this is with both this red color in her dress and the sky oversaturated, and this is with the effect applied, this is without the effect. Similarly, I can make one oversaturated and one undersaturated, or both undersaturated. So you can see this is without the effect and this is with the effect. Right now, this is the original waveform, and when I enable this effect, you can see how it squeezes together. And let me also reset that to move on to the last one, which is saturation versus saturation. So this curve allows us to saturate or desaturate certain luminance values in the image. So for example, if I click somewhere in the sky, grab this point and move it down, everything turns black and white or desaturated in the clip and in the waveform. You can see that here there are a little bit of colors, but here there are no colors, and actually it's almost black and white except for certain red and yellow colors, which you can see a little bit of, but everything else turns black and white or desaturated. But let's say we don't want to affect the whole clip. We want to retain the colors in her dress. So for that, let me reset that. And now when I click this sky, the whole color range is selected, but we want just a narrow range of the colors. We don't want these colors to be affected. So I can just click somewhere to add an additional point. So now this is the range that will be changing. So now if I grab this point and move it up or down, everything else turns black and white except for this dress. And even in the waveform, you can see that all other areas turn out to be almost black and white except for this location where she is, and here you can see all these colors. These are still saturated, but everything else is desaturated. Why? Because we selected the appropriate range where we are decreasing saturation, but she is probably lying in this region where the saturation is not being affected. So this is without the effect, and you can see all the colors in the waveform throughout. And when I enable this curve, you can see all these colors in this region and this region are taken away, but everything else in this region stays intact. So again, I'll reset that. So with these curves, we can create many amazing visual effects and play around with colors in very interesting ways. I hope you are enjoying this section. Thanks, and I hope to see you in the next lesson.